Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, June 15th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the first poll from the state of Pennsylvania, a USA Today Suffolk University poll, the first one that we have seen in a very long time. The reason why this is such a big deal is number one, because Pennsylvania is such a closely watched state. There is a competitive governor's race, a competitive Senate race, and many competitive House elections across the state. And it also will serve as a state that will be a true determining factor about whether or not Biden's disapproval rating and inability to appeal to voters in the way that he did in the 2020 election will hinder Democrats down ballot. Should the Democrats win both races across the state of Pennsylvania, it will be a testament that Democrats can still hold on, despite a Biden unfavorability rating. Now, the other interesting thing about this is that the only polls from the state of Pennsylvania so far are internal polls by the Democratic Party or polls that are sponsored by a John Fetterman PAC that is Data for Progress. Now, what that would mean is that all of the polls leading up until now really haven't been done by an external third party, really haven't been done with some level of inherent bias or meaning behind them. So this is the first poll in quite some time, and it's going to be very interesting to take a look at some of these results because I can tell you right now they are quite shocking. And not shocking because the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is performing as good or as bad as some people might have expected. I think many people could have expected a result similar to the one that we are seeing in the governor's race and also the Senate race, but there are a bunch of things that might catch a bunch of Republicans and Democrats off guard, and we're going to go ahead and look at that right now. So, what happens in the state of Pennsylvania? What are the polls telling us? Well, to begin, they tell us that Democrats are set to win both elections within the state. Currently speaking, I have predicted that Democrats will maintain control of the U.S. Senate through the state of Pennsylvania, sort of avoiding another loss and offsetting a loss to the GOP and other states. Looking at the governorship as well, I also expect the Democratic Party to win this governorship. Now, the interesting thing, though, from this and my main takeaway is not that the Democrats are leading in both. Like I told you, my predictions expect that Democrats are going to win both of them. I would say, number one, the margin is slightly higher than I expected, but not necessarily for the races that I expected. The Pennsylvania governor's race right now shows Josh Shapiro, the incumbent attorney general, only ahead by about 4 points. Now, being ahead by 4 points in a swing state, that is good for a Democrat. That is good for someone who had won statewide before and had seen similar polling numbers in the past and ultimately ended up winning in a very significant margin relative to Joe Biden last election. Looking at the Senate election, John Fetterman being ahead by 9 points is also quite surprising because we are in a position where the Senate race is a lot more national, a lot less about candidate quality, and more so about the balance of power. I didn't really expect Dr. Oz to be in a position where he was only at 37% of the vote. I honestly expected these numbers to be flipped. I would have expected Mastriano to be down by 9 points as an internal GOP poll had predicted. I also expected Oz to be down by maybe 4 points or potentially up against John Fetterman. Where we are right now on the national standpoint puts us in a tricky position when it comes down to Pennsylvania because it makes it a little bit more difficult to predict. But I am honestly glad that we've gotten some more data out of the state, and it does tell us a lot about what we can expect for the midterms and what stands right now within the Senate race and also the governorship. But of course, that's not the only thing that was polled within the state of Pennsylvania. If you go ahead and look, they also did an approval rating poll across the state. They asked voters in the state of Pennsylvania, do you approve of Joe Biden or disapprove in his job performance? And what you find is that just 39% of voters say they approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing. 54% say they disapprove. Yet somehow, the Democrats are miraculously getting 46% of the vote, 44% of the vote, when Biden is only at 39%. In addition to that, the Republicans are barely cracking 40. Dr. Oz is at 37%. Mastriano is at 40%. Biden's disapproval rating is 54%. I don't know if many of you guys have seen the video that I published maybe a few months ago talking about the Republican Party's major voting problem. But it is this drop-off between the approval rating of Biden and the amount that Republicans get on the generic ballot. Meaning that if Republicans are up 2 points nationwide, it usually connects with a disapproval rating of Biden, a net disapproval of about 13 to 14 points. There is about a 10-point drop-off nationwide between the GOP margin of victory and where Biden is. And you can see that very well within the state of Pennsylvania, even more so than you otherwise might expect. They also take a look at favorability ratings for certain candidates. They take a look at Tom Wolf, the incumbent governor. He won re-election by 17 points in 2018. He doesn't seem to be doing too hot. At a 44% approval rating, typically speaking, he was very much approved of. But when you take a look at the approval ratings or favorability ratings rather than approval ratings, Joe Biden is at 43%, slightly up from where he was. Maybe that can make up for the fact that Shapiro is at 44 and Fetterman is at 46. Fetterman's approval rating or favorability rating is 45. Shapiro is 45. But the Republicans, on the other hand, are all lower than every Democrat across the state. The incumbent senator, Pat Toomey, 26% approval. Dr. Oz, 28% approval. Doug Mastriano, 36% approval, all of which in the negative. Democrats might be in the negative with Biden, but are up with Shapiro, up with Fetterman, and up with the overall statewide standpoint. I was about to say up with Wolf, but that certainly is not true. It is down 2 points, but also I guess it is something to point out that it's not nearly as much down as it is amongst Republicans. The point being that the numbers here, surprisingly enough, do not favor the GOP. I think many people were expecting Oz to be ahead in the Senate race and Mastriano to be down in the governor's race, but seeing it now with the Republicans down in both sort of should serve as a shock to the GOP that not everyone cares about Biden's approval rating. Not everyone cares about where Biden is. Now, Suffolk University released their methodology, they released their margins and their crosstabs. You can go ahead and check that out. You can find that out on their website. I'll put the link in the description box down below if you want to find out more information. But we're really only going to be focused on the top two races because they really are the most significant ones. And we've seen the favorability ratings, we've seen the approval ratings, we've seen the general election numbers, and now we can move on and further down into analysis about the state. So, number one, I will say, like I said, I was not surprised. Biden won this state by 1.2%, and what we have seen in Pennsylvania is that even in red waves, sometimes Democrats can win. I point out the 2014 governor election in Pennsylvania where there was an incumbent Republican governor. I believe his name was Tom Corbett, and he ran against Tom Wolf, the incumbent governor now, and Tom Wolf won in 2014 by nearly 10 percentage points. Everyone understands that 2014 was a red wave year. Republicans maintained control of the House, they won control of the Senate, flipped 9 Senate seats, but the point was that Pennsylvania, surprisingly enough, did not flip, at least maintain the GOP dominance. Maryland actually went blue before, Maryland actually went red in 2014, and Pennsylvania did not. It was a complete flip-flop. Pennsylvania should have been a lockdown for the GOP, and I get it. Unpopular governors do tend to bring poor results for the incumbent party, but I will also say that it also is something to be said about Democrats being able to win despite the entire nation practically pushing against them. And we saw that in 2014. The fact that Biden won in 2020 also serves as a bit of a testament to Josh Shapiro's electability because Joe Biden won by 1.2%. While some people may praise this and say that this was a good margin for Joe Biden, honestly, it was less than expected. But one candidate in specific did better than any other statewide Democrat in Pennsylvania history, and that was Josh Shapiro. He won the Attorney General's race in the state with 3.461 million votes. And the reason why I tell you that, Josh Shapiro became the number one vote getter in Pennsylvania history. That's right, he got more votes than any candidate has ever received in the state of Pennsylvania. So, looking at the Biden victory compared to the Shapiro victory, one was clearly more deafening. One was clearly more substantial. This was a 5-point victory versus a 1-point victory. Rounded up, rounded down, truly speaking, about a 3 to 4 point difference. That's significant, especially in a swing state, especially when you have an election that is so hotly contested. Looking at the state of Pennsylvania for 2022, I would also like to say that some of these numbers likely can be explained by the insane primaries that Republicans went through in the Senate race, and not so much in the governor's race. Doug Mastriano handedly won across the state. He got 44% of the vote, he received the Trump endorsement, and it was a very significant victory. This was not down to the wire by any means. 44% of the vote, substantial, enough to say, absolutely, this makes sense. He ran against Lou Barletta, who was the 2018 Senate nominee, lost to Bob Casey. He decided to run for governor, immediately was the frontrunner. Doug Mastriano came from behind, built up all this momentum, and won in the state of Pennsylvania. And that is more impressive than you could ever really imagine, especially knowing how competitive the Senate election was. Taking a look at the Democratic primary, Josh Shapiro ran unopposed. So essentially, these two candidates ran without any scrutiny or attacks from their own party. Doug Mastriano obviously has been hit by the Democrats more recently, but looking at the Senate election, those Republicans were attacked for months on end because we knew, and they knew, that their competitive primary was going to be the main thing in the state of Pennsylvania. It was never going to be the uncontested Democratic primary or the practically uncontested GOP primary. It was always going to be this Senate election. Now, the Democrats, John Fetterman, also, they did not really go through a contentious primary. While Conor Lamb, for a brief period of time, thought he had a chance at victory, John Fetterman ended up doing very well, especially as the lieutenant governor. John Fetterman handily defeated Conor Lamb, won by over 30 percentage points across the state, won every single county, and it wasn't significant at all. It wasn't not insignificant at all. Looking at the GOP primary, on the other hand, well, this is where it got very interesting. Look at that margin of victory. Less than 1,000 votes with over 1.3 million votes cast. This tells you that the primary was extremely contested. But it wasn't that it was just extremely contested. Character was defamed for all of these candidates within the race. Kathy Barnett was attacked. Dave McCormick was attacked. Dr. Oz was attacked. All three of them vilified by each other. And you don't recover from a primary that went to a decision to the courts, to a recount, to a very contested position easily. You don't come away from this unscathed. A competitive primary can harm your general election endeavors. Obviously, voters can move on, forgive and forget, whatever it might be, recognize that a primary was a primary, but at the end of the day, when you have an electorate, a piece of it, a good chunk, that is disengaged and unhappy with their nominee, they probably aren't going to be super willing to vote for one specific candidate. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Dr. Oz won by less than 0.01%. It was an extremely narrow margin, which tells you that Oz clearly was not the favorite. And you can see that in these numbers. I think a lot of these negative numbers that we've seen for the GOP, whether it comes down to Toomey, Mastriano, or Oz, comes as a result of Democratic messaging. But specifically in this general election, I think this negative result for Dr. Oz comes as a result of the Democratic Party's consistent messaging combined with the Republican Party's consistent messaging against him. There is a reason why Dr. Oz, even with the Trump endorsement from back in April, could not win that primary as easy as Doug Mastriano did. Because Mastriano did that on his own accord. Oz needed the Trump endorsement to win. He wouldn't have won without it. And even when he did win, it wasn't exactly by this exceptionally large margin. Voters in Pennsylvania clearly had a preference. They wanted a Trump candidate, but they didn't know which one. And Oz very clearly was not the immediate favorite amongst the GOP. He barely won this election through a fractured Republican Party. Had Kathy Barnett not been in the situation, sure, Oz might have been able to do better. But what does it say that Kathy Barnett labeled herself as the Trump candidate, yet voters were willing to listen to her more than they were willing to listen to the Trump-endorsed candidate? The point is that Oz is not this engaging and exceptional candidate as some people might think. Oz is losing by 9 points in the only reputable poll that we have across the state. Remind yourself of where the generic ballot is. Remind yourself of where Biden is. Biden is down 15.5% nationwide. He is doing worse than Trump was at this point in time. The generic ballot, Republicans are up by 4. Now, this is according to Real Clear Politics. 538 has slightly different numbers, but you get the gist. Democrats down nationwide by 4, Biden down by 16, and yet somehow, John Fetterman, a Democrat in Pennsylvania, a swing state, is up by 9 points. What does this tell you about the unelectability of Dr. Oz and the electability of John Fetterman? It tells you that the Democrats did well with their nomination, and the GOP didn't seem to do so. Now, what I expect to see as more attack ads and campaigning from Shapiro comes out of the state of Pennsylvania, that Mastriano starts to lose by a similar amount. By the end of this election, I will be shocked if the governor election is closer than the Senate election. Because realistically speaking, Doug Mastriano is a lot more extreme and a lot more willing to fight for what he believes in than Oz is. And I don't say that to knock Oz or criticize him. I more so say that to say that Oz definitely comes across as more moderate, even though both of them are very clearly right-wing, at least in the way that they present themselves. I'm not going to speak on the policies or the stances that Oz might have taken in the past. The point being that Mastriano probably should have been losing more, but I think it comes as a result of a pretty good primary for himself, combined with the fact that Shapiro, while focusing on general election messaging, probably hasn't hit as hard as he otherwise would have. And a lot more damage can be done by your incumbent party than an opposition party. And you can see that very clearly with Oz. When you had McCormick and Barnett undermining his intelligence, undermining his Republicanness, undermining his conservativeness, voters aren't exactly going to be too enthused to vote for him. I don't think Fetterman will win this Senate race by 9 points. I think we're looking at maybe a 1 to 2 point race. But what I do expect is voters to be relatively disengaged with Oz versus they would be with an incumbent Toomey, or they would be with a McCormick. Dr. Oz has very clearly carpetbagged. He's moved from the state of New Jersey to run in the state of Pennsylvania. He's only been here for a year. Voters recognize this, and voters don't like that. They are going to choose their, at-home candidate, John Fetterman, over someone who moved to the state for political electability. It's interesting to see Dr. Oz is losing by 9 points, Mastriano is losing by 4 points, and this likely is one of the best results the Democrats could have seen from the state of Pennsylvania. Because looking at where we are right now, nationally speaking, looking at where Biden is across the state, where Tom Wolf is across the state, these results are very good for the Democratic Party. Because in just 5 months, we will hit the general election, an official election day, and Democrats are likely going to say, we are going to build up this lead now, and it's likely going to dissipate. Because voters are going to become increasingly more willing to vote for Republicans, as we have seen in years past. But right now, a 9-point lead and a 4-point lead are definitely not bad places to start, especially when Biden is down nationwide by 16 points, 14 points, whatever source you look at, somewhere around there. And it gives the Democratic Party likely some hope about their abilities and prospects in the state of Pennsylvania for the upcoming midterms. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.